We've been talking about Moses now for a while. And the last time we spoke about Moses, we talked about the plagues as they came upon the people. God showing the Egyptians who he was, the most powerful God. They asked the questions, Pharaoh had asked the questions, who is this God that I shall let the Israelites go? Well, God explained to him through these plagues who he was. And as they leave Egypt after the last plague, and the Israelites leave Egypt, they confront one of the most historic happenings in this world that has been written in many times, has been played in many movies, and in constant, and there isn't one person in this world, probably at least here in the United States, who doesn't know about this happening, who's had some sort of education and done any study of history that doesn't know about this occurrence. One of the greatest occurrences that has ever happened in the history of this world. And it came out of a moment of desperation, where God actually puts his people in a position, in a situation that only God can save them. Have you been put in that position in your life? When you get to this point in your life, there isn't any money that can help you. There isn't anybody you can call that can give you a solution. There is no place to go. There is nothing that you can do, and you feel so powerless. I remember a man coming to me and says, who was very well off financially, and we had spoke to him about coming to church, about being part of Christ and giving his life to Christ, but he had everything. You know, he had everything. He had accomplished so many things. And he never saw the need for God or for church. And one day he comes to me and says, Pastor, my wife is going to die. No money can help. There's nothing that I can do. Can you please help? I said, no. But God can. And there was his beginning when he came to God. But God put his people in that type of situation. And sometimes when we are so far down that the only way that we can look is up is probably one of the biggest blessings in our lives. Because then finally, we learn who we really are. And humanity sometimes needs to learn who we really are, so that we can then start praising God and living for God. As we look at society today, there's something that is just constant that we see all over the place, and it's desperation. It's desperation in finances. It's desperation in diseases. It's desperation in family situations. It's desperation in parents who as we have brought up our children, we're going and we don't know. We're not sure yet of which direction they are going to take. And we feel so helpless in so many of our situations, and there's a feel of just being helpless as you go everywhere and you talk to people. They feel as if their future is so unsecure. Remember a few years ago, somebody who had a good retirement plan felt secure. You know, they had a good retirement plan. They've been saving for years. Now there is no security in any retirement plan. Sometimes we feel healthy. We feel like we're secure, and we don't know what's coming right around the corner. There's so much insecurity going on. We as a church also sometimes feel insecure, and we feel hopeless. We talk about as a church, as we talked about visioning. We talked about how we want to be able to own our own church. We've been from place to place for many years. And as we talk about being able to build on the land that we have, and when we talk about being able to, to go forward and own our own church, you talk to people about building a church now, and they look at you and say, you're going to build a church now? When we're barely making budget. Are you going to ask people to give money for a building when they're barely making their rent? You know what? When people say that to me, I say, you know what? That just might be the perfect situation for God to make a miracle. We just might be in the perfect spot for God to do something so that only He receives the glory. In the book of Psalms, chapter 22, verse 4 and 5, it tells us the following verse. It says, our ancestors trusted in you, and you rescued them. You heard their cries for help and saved them. You put they put their trust in you and were never, never, never disappointed. The crossing of the Red Sea that we will talk about today is the greatest happening in the Scriptures. In fact, from the moment that it went on, for thousands of years later, still, when the prophets wrote, they reminded the Israelites of the crossing of the crossing of the Red Sea. They kept it in their mind. It was such a powerful happening in the people, in the lives of the Israelites. It was one of the most impossible things actually happening and being carried out as the greatest miracle that God ever did in their lives. And the prophets would use that, and they would go back and say, remember when He did this. Some of us have had the experience of the crossing of the Red Sea in our lives. When we have put in a situation, we have been put in a situation that only God could work. And as God did that years later in our lives, when we confront other difficulties, we look back and we remember, we say, God saved me then, therefore God will save me now. And the experience of the crossing of the Red Sea is needed for every Christian, because we need something to go back to. Because, we are, as human beings, when we confront difficulties, we begin to doubt God. When God doesn't do what I want Him to do, I doubt Him. Because we want to tell God what to do. And if God is really God, He should do this and that, don't you think? If God is really God, He should act the way I want Him to act. That's how we think sometimes. But if you've had a Red Sea experience, you look back and you're able to see how God will do the impossible. The people of Israel had left Egypt. Finally, Pharaoh said, get out of here. I don't want to see you. He had lost his own son in his last plague. But as we see this story, we need to go back and learn from it. One of the worst things that you can do is read the Scriptures and not learn anything from it. In the book of Romans, chapter 15, verse 4, it tells us everything that was written in the past was written to teach us. The Scriptures give us patience and encouragement so that we can have hope. So we need to look back at the scriptures. We need to see the things that happened there and not only see it as part of history, as something that we study, but we need to see it as something that will give us hope, that will give us encouragement, that as we see the acts of God in the past, we can be sure of the acts of God in the future. The Bible gives us a way out. It gives us a way out. It gives us a solution, especially to a society now that as they look at the future, they see little solution. In the book of Exodus, if we go to chapter 13, we'll open our Bibles now, give you some time, open up your Bibles to the book of Exodus chapter 13. Verse 17. And we go here to the point where now Pharaoh had finally let Israel go. And they left, and it tells us that probably about 2 million people left Egypt. And when they left, they took a lot of things the Egyptians gave them. A lot of things. They gave them gold. They gave them pots and pans, and they gave them clothes, and they gave them all kinds of things to leave. They wanted them out of there. Then it says here in chapter 13, verse 17, then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God says, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. As we see this verse, you see that God could have taken the children of Israel on a more direct route to the promised land. There actually was a shortcut to the promised land, and I want you to remember the word shortcut to the promised land. It was a direct route from Egypt to Israel. It was only about 350 miles. Even 2 million people could have walked that in 6 to 8 weeks. But God said if they went the short route, they would encounter the Philistines who were a warring people. And the children of Israel were soft from about 400 years of slavery, and they were not ready for battle. So there was a shortcut, and God could have taken them through that shortcut. But yet God takes them the long way. After I read that and I thought about it a little bit, I wrote this: God's long way is always accompanied by his presence, while our shortcuts are mostly very lonely. And what happens is we, a lot of times, want to take shortcuts to everything. We even want to take shortcuts to our spiritual lives. We look at our finances and we want to take shortcuts towards our finances. We want to take shortcuts in our marriage. We want to take shortcuts in all these different things. But the thing is that God a lot of times takes us a long way because God sees the big picture. He sees more than what we can see ourselves. And God's long way, remember that today. I'm going to tell you a few things that I'd like for you to remember today, and this is one of them, is that God's long way is always accompanied with his presence. But our shortcuts are always lonely. So you have to decide in life which way, how do you want to travel through life? Do you want to travel with the presence of God, or do you want to travel on your own? If we look at Exodus chapter 13, verse 21 and 22, 13, 21, 22 says, and the Lord went before them. And as they left, says that God went before them. They went a long way, but God was with them. He went before them by day in a